Hello, people. Sorry for the delay. A few technical difficulties there, but it's with pleasure I introduce my guest tonight. I just need to say to people that the video will come off YouTube.
Hang on a minute, Sharon. It's lagging a little bit.
Yeah,
it's lagging a little bit. Give it a second to catch up, and it should be right with you. I'll try and close everything down as well on my end because I think it might be my end.
No, my phone's saying no internet connection now.
I can hear you both.
Are we all right?
Through lagging a bit. It should be all right now, though. See how we get on. Well, sorry about that.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, can I just ask people if they can jump over to VK if you're on VK? Because as Dolores, I'm sure you won't mind me saying that we might get thrown off YouTube anyway, being you know, the subject that we're going to be talking about. So yeah, I know emergency channel. Yeah, we're on the emergency channel because we're already deplatformed, but off the other one, I think there's a problem with that. So anybody that can get onto VK, please do so that you can watch the video because
everyone
I'm sure you'll be very interested. It'd be very interesting what Dolores has got to say. Professor Dolores Carroll, you're an immunologist, aren't you? Mouthful there. And I'm going to let you explain.
No. We do have an immune system, you know, like we have a nervous system and a blood circulatory system, but people have forgotten that we actually have an immune system in 2020. That's my area, immunology.
So what have you been doing this year, Dolores? Exactly. Because you've been doing a lot of work. You've been a very busy lady.
I have been a little bit busy. So I was one of the people that helped organize the first and second Trafalgar Square rallies. And I suppose why that came about is that we had SARS, if anybody is old enough to remember, about 17 years ago, there was a SARS pandemic. And then we had swine flu and we had avian flu and we had, you know, Zika and a lot of these, you know, BSE, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. And about more than 20 years ago now, I realized that a lot of these so-called pandemics, actually not so many people were dying, and that the fear associated with these viruses was really hyped up. And then there were articles coming, you know, maybe a year or two later to say that, for example, Dr. Neil Ferguson, in about 8 of these pandemics, exaggerated more than 10 times or even 100 times or more the deaths that were associated by these infectious agents. And then I realized about 17 years ago, like for SARS, that some of the safest treatments in the world meant that no one need die from these viral infections, but that also if you tell people, especially the elderly and those with underlying diseases, that you can protect and boost your own immune system with vitamin D, vitamin C, and zinc. And hydroxychloroquine and zinc was one of the safest medicines in the world. And then ivermectin as well. So vitamin D and C won a Nobel Prize in ivermectin. So I began to see a pattern,
Dr.
you know, that there was
actually advocated for hydroxychloroquine in 2005, didn't he?
Yeah, yes, exactly. And so then my background for over 20 years is in immunology. And actually, no matter whether you get a drug or vitamin D or C or ivermectin or even a vaccine or a treatment, it's actually your own immune system that keeps you well, right? So all of those are there to boost your immune system. And actually, even if they give you vaccines, it's to boost your immune system to protect you. So what I realized 20 years ago is that people should be given information that if you want to be healthy, your immune system is really important. And what's really important is simple things like good food, crystal clear water, de-stress, right? Lots of family contact, lots of friends, lots of volunteering, joining choirs, joining clubs. And then if you do get sick, these, you know, drugs or medications, some of the safest in the world, hydroxychloroquine and zinc and ivermectin, will actually keep you healthy and treat the symptoms in the week or two when you get something that causes flu-like symptoms, and then you will be well. And a lot of the issues that people like doctors like Dr. Muhammad Adil has been censored, because actually it turns out there is no requirement for a vaccine a year later for last year's flu. If the doctors actually gave you this information of vitamins D, vitamin C, and zinc, but especially hydroxychloroquine and zinc and ivermectin, can cure everybody within that week or two. And so I would expect when this information gets out, this health information, that we can reduce the number of people, including the elderly, that die from influenza-like illness drastically. So that is the good news. And it turns out you actually don't need a vaccine years later for, a flu from years ago. Get hydroxychloroquine and zinc, ivermectin and zinc. Protect your own health by common sense, sleeping, good nutrition, de-stress, engaging with the community, vitamins D, C, zinc. And actually you will not have to worry about something that causes influenza-like symptoms.
I heard, Dolores, there was a demo in Austria, I think it was, and they were shouting, "Make influenza great again."
And they were going around talking about freedom. So I actually got that video this morning from, people in the network. There's lots of people. So I think, you see, there's been differences in society where the big state gets a lot of power. If they say to people, you cannot control your own health or your own, what you do in life, you make yourself dependent on us and we will lock you in your homes, right? And then you have to hang around for a year until we come up with the vaccine. But because we haven't given you the treatment, we'll say we're going to rush a certain therapy or vaccine through. And they don't really honestly say that maybe the vaccine might cause more harm than good. And they censor people who are trying to tell you that actually you can look after your own health. And there are wonderful drugs that have been FDA approved and EU approved, WHO approved for 60, 70 years that actually can keep you well in the week or two when you have the symptoms of flu. And if you have underlying conditions like diabetes or cardiovascular disease, you can also be protected and your life can be protected.
And Johnson and Hancock, it's apparently £3 trillion that they need to account for that's been spent on COVID-related deals that they've obviously got investments in.
Yeah, so this is around the area of conflict of interest. So in a way, I don't have any conflicts of interest in vaccines, and I haven't, even though I came up with the technology to develop vaccines. When I applied that technology, it was to a vaccine in an EU grant in Africa, but I didn't make any money from it or whatever. So in a way, what we need to have for all politicians and people who are on these committees is like under the screen, a kind of a conflict of interest scale, right? Would you benefit if this law was made? Would you benefit if this vaccine was, vaccines in general were commercialized? So that while, I am someone who believes in the free market and creating jobs, and I've, borrowed money to set up companies to create jobs, right? And taken the risk. But you just have to have a scale to say, do you have shares in companies that would have a conflict of interest? So in the BBC and everyone, there should be a scale underneath going, conflict of interest. Would you benefit? Yeah. Yes or no, and the date, and that should be a legal statement. And as we know, there has been some investigative journalists like Polly St. John, and lots of people, but have actually systematically analyzed, have the institute, has the named person, has a person on an advisory committee, has a member of parliament, has a prime minister, has a minister, beneficial interest in whatever legislation they're doing, or if a vaccine is approved. And of course, that clouds people's judgment. So I don't have any conflicts of interest with vaccines, but it's a very important point that you're making.
Yeah, because I understand quite a few of them have got either family members that work for these GlaxoSmithKline companies and things like that. So, it does need investigating. And I think there's a few people putting in cases against them out there at the moment. There's a group of doctors putting in.
But what I'm kind of saying is kind of a different way, Sharon, is that there should be, if we have any, innovators out there, that people in the public domain, including me, should have to, before they go, make a public declaration for whether they benefit from certain legislation. and do a disclosure of what shares they have, or if they've got grants in the previous, lifetime even from companies, or if they are promised. Because what we've seen in the vaccine related, even in the regulatory sphere, we had people that led the CDC in America, Centers for Disease Control, would have, brought in regulations or legislation around a particular disease or a particular vaccine. And then after they finished that job, after 5 years, they go in and head the vaccine section of the pharmaceutical company that actually manufactured that vaccine. And I think the other thing people don't know is that the CDC, which is kind of seen as the regulator around the world, that they get 40% of their income every year from the licenses that people pay to apply to get their vaccines licensed. So that if if you're in an institute or in a regulatory body, and if you license a particular vaccine, your institute will get more money. That also is a conflict of interest, because there'll be more money for travel, or there'll be more money for conferences or whatever, kickbacks. So I've been studying research integrity for 20 years, and it's very easy. So you just have to have a transparent thing. And, if people want to be private, that's fine. But if they want to, present themselves as pillars of the community, to go on these committees, to tell people, I recommend that your children wear masks, even though it's absolutely detrimental for children, right? There is no basis for it at all. I think it's hugely damaging, right? Or to say that people who are in care homes can't go out for Sunday lunch, right? So if you're going to, say I'm an upstanding member of society, I will go onto some advisory committee, right? That you need to be, if you are putting yourself into the public domain like I am, then you have to also, as these NEFID members or people who are ministers or members of parliament, they have to have a transparency index in front of them on the screen and declare before each individual interview, potentially, do you have a conflict of interest? Have you got money from the Bill Gates Foundation? Do you have shares in pharmaceutical company? Do you have a company that will benefit from the distribution? If you were a doctor, would you get money from administering the vaccine?
Yeah. And they're now opening hospitals 24 hours. You can get a vaccine 24 hours a day now, apparently. But yet they're cancelling everybody's operations, and they're not doing screenings that they were doing because they haven't got the capacity. But yet the hospitals are empty when you walk round them.
Exactly. So that's a very good. So this is because even though I've been working in this area, a lot of the things is around common sense, right? So, I know I grew up on a farm in Tipperary, and I actually think I knew more back then than, because, we'll say if you're in the university system now, in my university, you can tick a box whether you're a man or a woman, right? Whereas when I grew up on a farm, right, if if a dog had pups, or if there was a calf born, you'd actually say, or if there was a baby, you say, is it a boy or a girl, right? So there's a lot of kind of things in society where people, it's like crazy now, right? The more you're actually interacting with the system. So a lot of the things, what you're saying is, it turns out, even I would say the numbers are very inflated in the United Kingdom and England, that even with these inflated and false COVID-19 is the 19th lowest cause of death, right? So what you're saying, and what I would be saying is, do the people that are actually locking down these hospitals, do they not care about the other 18 causes of death that every day and every month are causing more illness? And as we know, right, what is shocking is certain people are watching this with chronic pain, right? Or if they even need to go to a dentist, because if, like me, I would never do a PCR test, right? But also cancer, like there are rapid cancers, like melanoma or brain tumors or ovarian, or if you have like the symptoms of cardiovascular disease, but you might actually have lifelong consequences of a stroke because you were afraid to go to the hospital. So the question we need to ask is, since this COVID-19, probably with inflated results, is the 19th, why is the health system not looking after the top 18? And in Ireland, we say 30,000 people die every year, but 1 in 3, so around 10,000 die from cancer, 1 in 3 from cardiovascular disease. And in Ireland, in the flu year, out of 30,000, about 140 people died from COVID-19, right? that means that 29,800 died from other diseases in 2020. So we are not here to look after our health service, right? Our health service is not a child. The Minister for Health and the Prime Minister, they're not children. They are rocking up, getting paid to look after the health of the people in the United Kingdom and in Ireland, right? So we are not there to look after the health service, right? Or the NHS. The health service is there to look after us. And you can scale. This thing has been going on for a year. So it is actually, I would say, contributing to death and pain and suffering that they are not treating the 18 higher causes of death immediately every day, rather than treating COVID-19, the 19th highest cause of death.
And it's the rise in other things like mental health, depression, suicide, because people with mental health problems, they go to the gym to work out, they have their activities that they're no longer allowed to do. So therefore, the mental health, there's no treatment for that unless they want to medicate. Well, we all know what the medication for mental health does to you. It doesn't help you, does it? In most cases, you need to find something on a daily basis that feeds the soul, really, not just taking a tablet that's going to give you suicidal thoughts if you think about coming off of it, which I know a lot of people that have committed suicide because of this, the medication, rather than the mental health problem. So, it's all right to get your meds delivered to your door, as long as you don't expect any one-to-one kind of care.
Exactly. So you're touching on multiple, there's very important things, right? So what this thing has done has prevented small and medium businesses, right, from opening up, even though large ones has. That causes unemployment. So locking down the country when in March 2020, it was known that if you lock down, which is like what you do to prisoners, right, in a prison that have committed crimes, that it was known that that would cause unemployment. And the biggest cause of suffering in society and death is an increase in unemployment. So in Ireland, it increased from 5% in February 2020 to 25% in May because of this prison-enforced lockdown, right? And if you could easily have calculated in February and March, this has been known for decades, that with every percentage of increase, so we had 20%, what would be the impact? Exactly as you say, because of unemployment, it creates poverty. Poverty creates actually people are depressed, like you say, suicidal, but they don't have enough money for food. And their families actually go down on the things that they can do and educational attainment and opportunity and general happiness. So just to give you some figures, which is known for decades, that for 6 months of the lockdown in the UK and Ireland, it has been calculated that every single person alive in the UK now will have lost 6 months of life, right? So on average, everyone every month of the lockdown is going to live 1 month shorter. So in the United Kingdom, you are talking about 33 million years of life lost, right? For everyone alive in the UK now. And as you may have known, there's for the flu season in the UK, you're talking about less than 400 people have died from COVID-19. So we have a balance. So this rests on the shoulders in the UK of Prime Minister Boris Johnson personally and Minister Hancock. Everyone alive now has lost 33 million years of life versus around 336 deaths. But most of those deaths were preventable.
Yeah. My daughter worries about her.
So just to say, bring it back to common sense. It's about a harm versus good, right? What you do. This was all known before they did the lockdown. So when people like me say the harm of the lockdown is not just 10 or 20 or 100 times, it's like in the region of 1,000 times or 10,000 times more every single day. This has been known for decades. People who are saying this are being intimidated, censored, fired. But every day, Boris Johnson, every month, on average, he's causing, maybe 1 million years of life lost or more, right? Up to 5 million. That actually it is now getting to the stage where it's around the crimes of malfeasance in public office. And, people are dying unnecessarily. So you're actually talking potentially in the realms of crimes against humanity, because they are preventing treatments, the information about it. They are not giving the prevention and treatments to the population. They are locking them and, removing their freedoms, which a government under natural law, rule of law, under English constitutional law is not entitled to do. And they are carrying on something that's hugely detrimental to society when it's causing multiple times more harm. Shocking.
And the government can't make the vaccine mandatory, but what they do is an employer can make the vaccine mandatory. So they're already putting it out there. I mean, Pimlico, the plumber, big plumbing company in London, have said no jab, no job. They've put posts out that you may not be allowed into bars and restaurants and other places if you haven't had the vaccine and things like that. So they're already putting it out there I'm still astounded at the amount of people queuing up to get the vaccine. It blows my mind, because I knew they were going to try and get rid of small business and the middle class, because communism always get rid of the middle class. You have to get rid of the middle class in communism, and they were pushing for a communist society, socialist, whatever you want to call it, but it was communism, really, totalitarianism. It's all the same, but there's only those at the top and those at the bottom in that system. So it was always a given that they had to get rid of the middle class. I just didn't perceive how they were going to do it, and until 2020, of course. But if you'd seen Event 201 in 2019, you would have known everything that was going on anyway, because it was all planned. And even the opening ceremony for the NHS for the 2012 Olympics made out exactly what they planned to do in 2020. So why people are still falling for it, I just, it's almost like there's two different zones of reality, and I'm in one, and those that getting vaccine are in another,
So can I just say, maybe what you've done now, you've hit the nail on the head, right? So, from my background in Tipperary, what you're saying is, people underestimate the value of common sense, right? So you've touched on three things around mandatory, right? And then why is the government legally trying to force people or employers to take a job? And then the third thing is, which is very fundamental, is why are some people not having the critical analytical skills to not see that actually there's more harm done by this vaccine or not, right? So each of those are really, really important. But if I might just, first of all, touch around mandatory, right? So, I've been traveling with the World Freedom Alliance. Part of what we're trying to do is to say to people, because we've been, tracked by police and intimidated and death threats and, forced to potentially, like, I haven't signed passenger locator or worn a mask or whatever, but it's very interesting, right?
You want to speak a little bit? Do you want to explain what the World Freedom Group is that you're involved with?
You can join the worldfreedomalliance.org. Thank you very much, Sharon. That is really a group of, we have about 50 countries, but the aim is to have 200 countries in the world. We have a charter, which is basically to try and bring in all peoples of the world, just to recognize and teach people, or, inform them that you have freedom of speech, right? So the World Freedom Alliance is so that people actually realize, which goes to your thing about mandating the vaccines and mandatory, right? So the World Freedom Alliance is around the legal basis and to teach people, or to let people to remember, rather, understand the common sense thing that we are free and we are born free, right? And of course, the English people are the people who encapsulated this most articulately over the last, 1,000 years, right? So the World Freedom Alliance is to tell people, first of all, we are free people, right? And the important element of being free is freedom of speech, right? But part of having free speech is you need freedom to think. You need to be able to assemble and associate with people. So there's no point like thinking and speaking on your own. And so the fundamental rights that we have are freedom of association, freedom of assembly, right? Which was like organizing rallies, freedom to think, freedom of speech. But under the freedom to speak as well, you have to be able to receive information, such as health information, right? Which is why it is a total anathema to be censored, right? Especially for people under free speech, okay? And then the other freedoms are that you have bodily integrity, right? So the thing that you said is that employers are mandating, right? But of course, if you look up the legal term, mandate is related to voting, right? A mandate, right? Mandatory. So under the law, compulsory, right? If you have to do something, the legal term is compulsory. So just because somebody says they have a mandate or mandatory does not mean that something is compulsory. Okay? I know that's a legal definition, right? But just to say how I travel around the world, I've never, or, you know, mainly Europe, not filled in a passenger locator form, that what you do to your employer or to someone on a bus or to, you know, the immigration guys or a policeman, you say no, right? No, I don't want to wear a mask, or no, I'm not going to fill in. And what that simple word no is that then if you're really saying no, I do not consent, right? Okay, I do not consent. So then someone has to force you to do something against your consent. And what is kind of beautiful, especially for English people, is that English constitutional law is actually, even though you have this natural law that every civilization and every ancient people recognize what's called natural law, but that has been really enshrined in what's called English constitutional law, you know, natural law, the rule of law, English constitutional law underpinning the Magna Carta, right? And why that's really important is that children and everybody know right from wrong, right? That comes from your consciousness, yeah, and from your intrinsic morality, and how you can really see why it's called natural law. It's part of us as humans, right, from being born. And it's also called inalienable freedoms and inalienable rights. And this is really fundamental and has gotten me out of like multiple things to not be arrested, is that if you have the right of freedom, freedom to travel, freedom of speech, and freedom to consent, no one can take it away. No one. And so the fundamental thing of natural law, rule of law, is governments cannot take away your inalienable rights. And if you have an inalienable right to travel, to freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of speech, then no Minister Boris Johnson in no emergency act or guideline or regulation can take it away. And what's very easy is, so the kind of rule is act in honor, do no harm, right? But also that people know right from wrong. And if you're to say, well, how can you like know all this thing right from wrong, right? It sounds very complicated. But when you realize, if children, you know, if you have a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, right, and they see another child doing something unfair, right, something that is wrong, or if a parent or a teacher does something wrong, children rightly all over the world, whatever culture they come from, right, this is this is like over 10,000, 40,000, 100,000 years, they intrinsically know what is right or wrong. And so the natural law, right, is basically saying that we have a conscience, and that if you want to uphold the law, and in our law, right, in Ireland and in England, that a jury of your peers of 12 people can actually say whether something is right or wrong. But they have encompassed what can never be taken away from us is freedom of speech, freedom to think, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, bodily integrity, and access to justice under the law, right? And so that can never be taken away. And the role of governments is fundamentally to uphold our freedom. That's it. Okay.
The sad thing is, Dolores, how many people are freely, willingly giving up the right to that freedom or those freedoms by following the agenda and supporting the government agenda. And it's like, how are you not seeing? Like I've seen for years, right? They've been chipping away at our rights, even just when you get caught speeding and you used to have a little bit of grace on going over the speed limit, and they took that away. And at that point, I remember saying about they're just stripping us, it's drip, drip, drip. And I couldn't understand how other people weren't seeing it.
I haven't explained it very well, right? So what I'm trying to say is we, as from the minute of our birth, right, have certain inalienable rights, right? Inalienable means you can, or unalienable, you can't be taken away. Okay. And that the way these rights work, you have natural law, rule of law, right? Then you have the people. Underneath the people who bring these rights and freedoms into existence, right? We then say, okay, we will have a government, okay? And under the government, you have the legislature, you have the judiciary, right? Okay. But it turns out that the government, right, the parliament and the judges, they cannot, right, in this system, take away our inalienable freedoms. Okay, they just cannot. That's not the system, right? So the thing is, what has been undermined in this COVID-19 is the freedom of people to assemble, right? So when I was in Trafalgar Square and I was volunteering to be one of the organizers, right? And they were saying it would be 6 months, you know, detention and 10,000 fine. Now, of course, Kate Shamari and Fiona Hines volunteered as well. But I actually thought, you know what? This is a fundamental thing and we need to challenge it. And I was there talking to the police, right? Saying, no, we have in England and Ireland, you have inalienable rights to assemble, so that any police officer who would arrest me, I was saying I wouldn't pay the fine, I would go to prison, right? You know, if it was all unlawful. But if you do something unlawful, right, which the police are doing every day, I'm getting videos of police pushing people just walking, right? That is a criminal offense. But under the law, right, English constitutional law, the policeman can actually be criminally prosecuted under malfeasance, right? And anyone who swears an oath, right, under the fourth lower level of the government, right, or the people who swear an oath and are employed by us, the oath that they swear in the United Kingdom is to uphold the natural law and the rule of law, which enshrines our freedoms, including freedom of association, freedom of assembly. But the beauty and what I've been using in challenging coroners and doctors, right, in Ireland and supporting families going to in Northern Ireland doing it, is that you can sue individual coroners or ministers or prime ministers or policemen for engaging in unlawful behavior, right? And so even though it looks like things are pretty bad now, right, in England and in Ireland, in the law, what all these people are doing is wrong, it's unlawful. And what we need to do is to communicate to people, they need to video, right? The doctors or the policemen, like I saw policemen, 3 or 4 of them, ganging up and false, you know, unlawfully arresting, it looked like to be a teenager, right, in the last day or two. And then he was there challenging them because they're actually involved in unlawful behavior, which is criminal, like crimes of battery and assault, grievous bodily harm, detention of somebody, freedom of travel, which is, you know, kidnapping, and also as a constable engaging in unlawful behavior, wearing a uniform, which in Ireland is up to 20 years in prison, right? So there's like 5 or 6 crimes, and then the police officer actually punches this teenager in the head multiple times, knocks him to the ground, and has 3 or 4 police, right? So that's actually criminal behavior. So what we need to tell people is that actually people need to video that, take pictures of the numbers of the police, and we need to start a movement to bring back the rule of law so that people who you in the United Kingdom are paying your taxes cannot go around actually committing crimes of assault, battery, kidnapping, and denying people their inalienable rights. Okay, so unfortunately, I think, and we see the same thing with the vaccines, you know, that people are forcing people to do something against their rights of bodily integrity without their consent. And actually, you know, it was articulated very well in the Nuremberg Code that what they are trying to do is to coerce people to keep their job or to travel or engage in their fundamental rights to engage in some PCR test or whatever. And it's all unlawful. And I think in a way, there has been a misrepresentation of the law, which shockingly has been going on probably since about 1285, right? 17 years after the Magna Carta was signed on the 15th of June, 1215, right? Which is the basis of the English Constitution. They have been misrepresenting it, right? And so therefore you end up with people who are not educated about their rights. Maybe the police are not educated by their rights, but under the crime of malfeasance, and malfeasance as a prime minister or a minister, it actually says you cannot say you didn't know. You either knew or you should have known. If you're a policeman and you are getting paid every day, every week, every month, you have to know the law. It's not, and that's under the Nuremberg Code. You can't say I'm following orders or whatever. So just, I know that's a very long-winded way, but
I've actually got a case coming into court this year that's been open since Well, I got a solicitor in the Liverpool area. He specialises in taking the police to court. He's been in business a long time. I think he's prosecuted every police unit up and down the country. And my case against Greater Manchester Police is in court this year, and so statements have been going back and forth at this moment, like finalising statements and things like that. And you know, in his statement, he was saying he was following orders. He'd been told to give me a Section 35, but I was leaving the area. And so as I walked away, he grabbed hold of me, so effectively assaulted me twice, and then unlawfully arrested me because I wasn't committing any crimes or anything. So I've got a case against him, so it can be done. You know, and
absolutely, yeah. But I think not only do you want to have a case, right, but also for every time you need to catalog every hour you spend on that, right? And what I'm saying, it's the same. So the crime of malfeasance, right, which is when someone who takes an oath that's employed in the government or as a police person or as a civil service, right, commits the crime of malfeasance, it's 5 years to 10 years in prison. But also you can sue them personally for the amount of time that you've spent on the case. And we also need to, you know, under English constitutional law, people are entitled to a trial by jury, but it's actually
I've got
the jury
service, yeah. I've got jury.
Yeah.
I requested the jury.
Yeah, but actually under the English constitutional law, right, it's actually the jury that make the law and can assess the legal law and can decide the sentence, and the convener, right, not the judge. And so what's very fundamental under English constitutional law and under this legal system, which should be implemented, is that if the government on a much lower level brings in an act of parliament, a bill, a statute, a guideline or regulation, if it has been shown in one instance of one person that the actual regulation or the act was actually unlawful, which by definition infringes on the freedom for people to travel, you know, and bodily integrity, that regulation, guideline, act, statute, bill can be overturned in the whole country. And that's actually the basis of the rule of law in England. And the way it's working now for the last, you know, 800 years or maybe the last 700 years is actually unlawful, right? So what is going on now? And as we can see as well, if you want to look into it, that the England is set up, we'll say, in each country, not just as the entity, as the nation, but often in parallel. They have these corporation numbers that are set up in the company's house. And a lot of the things that the police are working in are mirrored in not the police system as such, but in a company that generates fines that benefits individual people, which is entirely unlawful. And that's why you see the police going around engaging in activity that they would never have done 10 years ago. Like a police 10 years ago would obviously have respected the inalienable rights of a teenager who was just walking there saying, I'm not doing anything. They wouldn't have like 6, grown men accost him, someone trying to put handcuffs on him, having not committed a crime, right? Probably similar to you. And then when he says, what are you doing? They go and punch him 3 times in the head. And 3 police officers in full uniform go and sit on top of him. Now, I don't know what happened to that poor, but that is actually criminal behavior. So unfortunately, while it seems desperate now, what we're seeing now, it's not right versus left, Labour versus Conservative. It's actually for people to understand freedom versus tyranny. And I would say what I experienced twice in Trafalgar Square and a lot of the videos I've seen since is tyranny, right? It's police out of control. And the reason from a psychological way why they can do that is they think they will get away with it. And how they will not get away with it is for people to re-engage with English constitutional law and learn, what is going on and to assert their rights of natural law and the rule of law and hold police to account and hold Minister Hancock to account and Prime Minister Boris Johnson to account.
Definitely. I mean, a friend of mine was lifted off the street on her way to work by the police, but she kind of campaigns against them because of the way they handled the murder of her son and everything. And so they lifted her off the street and took her to the hospital. She left the hospital the next morning. That evening, they came knocking at her door to see if she was home. And then the next morning at 6 o'clock or something, the ambulance turned up, and then the police turned up and took her back to the hospital and made her stay there for all weekend. She was forced to have an MRI scan and everything. She didn't even understand why she was there, you know, and that was forced on her with some piece of paper that she you know, even the mental health team didn't recognise. So they are out of control.
Yes, so they're out of control, right? But unfortunately, so you know, your kind of third question was, why are a huge percentage of the population queuing up for this whatever gene therapy treatment or taking part in the phase 4 of a clinical trial of an unlicensed or essentially unsafety tested or properly tested gene therapy or treatment, right? And so why it is quite insidious is, if you look into things like neuro-linguistic programming and coercion in people, is that it turns out that people have been told by agents of the state who they trust, like the politicians and the BBC and the media and, you know, the doctors and the scientists and a lot of elements in society, that there is this huge pandemic. There's a huge health issue. And if you make people fearful, you know, as we've seen, you know, was very well articulated in the 30s and 40s and 50s in World War II, that it's actually much easier to force them to do things they don't want. They're frightened and a different kind of, they're afraid to die. So they are easily manipulated. And then you look and see that a lot of the way this has been handled by a whole series of trusted people has the people, if they're afraid, their critical analysis skills shut down, and then they are more easy. And what they almost want, which is true, is to put them into a, not exactly a childlike state, but that's why you have all these, you're in tier 2, you're in tier 5, you can go 5 kilometers, you can do your shopping 1 hour a week. That might all seem quite random by people like us, but actually, if you were trying to coerce people, right, and make them fearful, what you then do is unsettle them from a psychological perspective by making everything so complicated that eventually they just say, okay, I give up. And they will just trust the state or whatever, the media machine or the, you know, the authority figures in society. And then they just say, okay, I will trust it.
And that's the thing with
numb, really. They're becoming numb.
Yeah, and that's what I was meaning with the taking the rights away drip by drip. I've seen it over the years, but they had to do that for people to be so compliant, because they get so used to them taking every right away from them, that when it came to your freedom to speak and think and gather, that it was easier to do, I think, because
over the
years.
So I know what you're saying, but what I'm trying to say is no one can take your freedoms away from you, right?
But it's the concept of it, isn't it? That people are giving their freedoms away by complying to things that don't make sense to them.
It's really important that you and I, when we're talking, right, that you can never give so the thing is, what people, you know, we are being propagandized, right, that your rights come from some bill, your rights come from the UN, your rights come from the EU, right? Now that's actually how the emperor has no clothes works, right? So I know I'm harping on about it, but the thing is, they cannot take away your rights and freedoms at all, right? So we have inalienable rights. They can never be taken away. And if a government, which is like, you have natural law, the rule of law, you have the people, right? We as people, because of our humanity, from the minute we're born, bring the natural law and the rule of law into existence. And then we decide we will have a government. But the first role of government and the head of government is to protect our freedoms, and they can never be taken away. And the government, that's the first rule. We bring them into existence. But the deal is, all over the world, the government cannot bring in anything that takes them away. So by the very fact of their existence, by trying to infringe on our rights that can never be taken away, they actually make themselves unlawful. So that actually they are not abiding by the rule of law, and they are not, you know, complying with the existence. So when I say, you know, if I'm dealing with the police, no, the government cannot bring in anything to infringe my rights. And if you do, the justice, right, which is brought in by us, the people, is we have to have access to justice in a timely manner. And justice, the first principle is that no one can take away our freedom to travel, freedom of assembly, freedom of bodily integrity, right? So what you and I were talking, I know I'm harping on about it, is no one can take away our rights and freedoms, and they don't come from the EU or the UN or a Bill of Rights. They come from us. They are inalienable, cannot be taken away. And if anyone tries to do it, especially if we work to pay their salaries and they swear an oath, they are only employed by us, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Minister Hancock. Their first role in life is, and they're paid to uphold our freedoms. So if they don't uphold our freedoms, then essentially they have actually are not the government, right? And the judiciary that don't actually have courts in public, have jury trials, where the first premise is, and that's why the difference about right and wrong, you know? So what England has given to the world is this rule of law, right? And a respect for democracy. And the reason why malfeasance, which I've been going on about, is important, and it comes from, you know, the Athenian philosophy of democracy, is to hold people to account, not to have a vote that doesn't matter. And how that hold people to account, which is beautiful, is that if a civil servant or a minister or prime minister brings in a law that infringes on our fundamental freedoms, that actually one jury trial where someone like you or that lady, their freedom to live and enjoy their family home was unlawfully taken away by police, and their bodily integrity and right to consent to medical treatment is taken away. With one jury trial properly constituted under English constitutional law, that act, right, it's called the annulment, right? The juries can pass a verdict and they can meet, but they can also annul. They can annul any act, statute, guideline, or regulation of a government with one case. So what's going on every day is totally unlawful, and it can be done. But the last thing with malfeasance is that the person who's injured, like you, right, or people where the doctors or coroners write the wrong death cert, they can sue any prime minister or minister under malfeasance personally for their loss of liberty, right, and curtailment of their rights, or if they are unlawfully making you have a PCR test or confining to your home in an act that doesn't respect our rights. Every taxi driver, every waitress, and I'm actually considering setting up, you know, a claim committee that we can personally sue these guys, because malfeasance is a crime of 5 to 10 years. But for every, you know, death that they've caused because of the lockdown, because of unemployment, because people can't travel, meet their family, meet their, you know, engage, meet their grandparents, they can be personally sued. Now, I don't want to be going around personally suing people, but unless civil servants and ministers can be individually held to account for actions that are, you know, reneging on the rights of freedoms, and every policeman, they will not change their behavior. And the fundamental principle of English constitutional law is to annul acts and, you know, statutes and guidelines by jury and jury trial. So it's fundamental.
This is where, with obviously with Children Matter and other, you know, myself, other people that have set up their groups and things, have been campaigning against forced adoption, because what you were saying there about taking away the rights, they're taking away the parents' rights every day with forced adoptions, taking children from birth at the hospitals with the police help and hospitals help and everything. And it's been going on. It's child snatching, really. It's kidnapping. They're removing that parent's rights to have that child, and that child's rights to have those parents.
So the thing is, just so you know, Sharon, you don't say they're removing rights, just so you know. I know I'm harping on, right? Yeah. They cannot remove the parents' rights.
I'll change my language.
No, you don't mean, I'm not that I'm a free speech advocate, right? But what they are doing is engaging in unlawful behavior, which is criminal. Yeah? You know what I mean? Because
and this is why we've wanted a case against the social workers that are telling lies against the family or building cases against the family to remove that child in the courts. And
well, the thing is, what we need is, right, and this is what I'm very happy to dedicate, you know, years of my life to do, is what we need is that under English constitutional law, right, we need a network of people that are actually, you know, we can provide courses, right? So as you, I don't know if you know, but there's people like Courtney Heading in the Isle of Man, and a lot of people who know about English constitutional law, right? And you can constitute jury trials under the law to bring access to justice. And the whole beauty 1,000 years ago, or whatever, of the English constitutional law was to hold people who worked for the government to account, right? So what's going on, if you're saying with children being taken away, is that people who we work to pay money for, to work for the government, are unlawfully, right, committing the crime of malfeasance, right? Or malfeasance in public office, malfeasance as a civil servant, and they can personally be held to that crime to account 5 to 10 years in prison. But the family and the child that has been taken away can sue them personally because they have committed a crime, which may be, battery, or then when they go to these families, they may have, child abuse issues, which obviously there's huge issues all around the world, right? So what we're seeing is, it's not that they're taking away rights from parents, is that you have people who are working for the government or the civil service engaging in the crime of malfeasance, and that we need now criminal courts to hold them to account. So it's the same, I would say, Minister Hancock, by not informing, people, especially the elderly, in January, February, March, April, they could have actually prevented getting sick and dying. And he should have made the world, essential medicines of the world, like hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and ivermectin available, right? That is actually, he's engaging, and I've been saying it, I said it in Trafalgar, of the crime of malfeasance. So every family who lost a loved one can actually sue him, right? And so what we need is, if a lot of people are unemployed now, as people, who were engaged in business are now watching this, that they say, you know what, England is the home of democracy, trial by duty, annulment of acts by jury, trial by jury, rule of law, natural law, that people will get together, do courses and qualifications, right, to hold people to account under English constitutional law, and then people will work together and say, okay, how many, coroners wrote COVID-19, how many doctors did not prescribe hydroxychloroquine, and people to submit their video evidence, and then to systematically start holding civil servants and police who go around punching teenagers who are just walking, that's not the kind of society that we want. And that once you start holding people to account for crimes, then the system will change.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem, isn't it? That the legal teams, like I asked a retired judge about, was there any solicitors in my area that would help these parents? And he basically said that they get money through the council, so they're much in favour of what the council want. They will go with what they suggest happens in court rather than working for the parent. And a lot of times parents go into court and find that the solicitor that they've got sitting there does nothing to help them at all, and that's because they're paid by the council and in their pocket. So yeah, I mean, the more people that get educated, like you say, if there's courses
but the thing is, right, so I'm a real problem solver, right? So the thing is, I couldn't find one pathologist in Ireland and UK for 12 days to do an autopsy, right, for someone who was misdiagnosed with COVID-19, right? So it's the same kind of thing, that if you're kind of there waiting for someone in the current system, why they don't do it, one pathologist around the world or whatever, is that they know that they're in a club, right? And it's all a bit like, a golf club or whatever, right? So even like a mafia, really, right? Or a cult, right? So of course, everyone is being, now we would have probably shouldn't say, but we'd have a phrase, that they're kind of being cute. You know what I mean? That it's like if you see a crime being committed and there's 100 people, that no one is actually going to do anything and everyone looks away. So that actually works well, right? So what we have to do is, actually Dr. Heiko Schöning, I'm the president of the World Doctors Alliance with Dr. Mohammed Adil, Dr. Zach Cox, but I'm also, and Dr. Heiko Schöning and he's vice president of the World Doctors Alliance and vice president and I'm president of the World Freedom Alliance. But when I spent 12 days looking for a pathologist in the whole world, calls from all over the world, couldn't get a pathologist. He did the analogy. It would be like a crime was committed and in the whole world, you couldn't find a police officer, right? Now, why you couldn't find one, it's a psychological experiment, right? Is that obviously all of the thousands and hundreds of thousands of pathologists in the world, right, are just thinking, oh, if I volunteer And if it turns out that this lady who has a death cert of COVID-19 died from something else, that if I then say, no, it wasn't COVID-19, you're actually calling into question the doctor, that put COVID-19, the hospital that wouldn't do an autopsy, the coroner that wouldn't do an autopsy, the state pathologist who wouldn't do an autopsy. It was reported to the police as a suspicious death. The police wouldn't investigate it, right? So, okay. So therefore, if you're a pathologist, you're thinking, well, if I actually go in and do it, my career is going to be ruined, right? And of course, that is, eventually we did get a very honorable, absolutely honorable pathologist, right, that came and did the autopsy, right? But then, of course, it turns out they transported all the tissue samples incorrectly, so they were destroyed and really couldn't be analyzed, right? Which, of course, that is, interesting, right? Okay, so what there's a guy called or Buckmeister Fuller, right? And it's kind of my mantra, and a lot of people who rock up, and I used it in my very first speech over a year ago now, nearly 2 years ago, is he said that if you want to do something in the world, you don't change the existing model or what's working. You build a new one and you make an old one obsolete, right? So for example, in the area of law, what I'm calling out is that we can actually, or you in England, right? You have lots of, people with a lot of time now, that you can actually just do a little bit of research into natural law, the rule of law, the Magna Carta, English constitutional law, access to justice, and come up with courses and, qualify people as lawyers, whatever you want to call them. And then you constitute jury trials, access to justice under the English Constitution. And then you start saying, and of course, you would need people to enforce it, because if the jury, says, the jury are the only ones that can actually say, what is the sentence, right? And then you would need to have sentences. And then you'd start to rock up and say to civil service or policemen in uniform who go around punching, teenagers or children, you actually start calling them to account, right? And that is the kind of revolution. So what I would be saying, and in the World Freedom Alliance, is like with the pathologists as well, right? I am promoting a thing that you could actually pay for your own autopsy, right? As like an insurance. So if you're engaging with someone who's going to give you a vaccine, or if you go into hospital, because a lot of healthy people now are coming out from hospital with much reduced life expectancy, right? Dead from whatever, that you would say to anyone, by the way, if I die, I already have paid my autopsy and I've signed all my data, and I'm interacting with you under notice of liability malfeasance, that if you do something wrong, I've already paid for an investigation into what happens, and my family will sue you if you have actually done something wrong. And of course, life, because it turns out that 1 in 10 people in the UK and Ireland die from adverse events and medical error, 80% of which can be prevented at a reduction in costs, right? And we see, I would say, a lot of the interaction and people who have gone into the healthcare system in the last year have not been treated properly, and that they have died because of the intervention that was incorrect, So what I'm saying is that we need for people to now say, okay, I'm not going to sit back anymore and go, I'm going to be locked in my home. I can't see my grandparent. Or if you're in a care home, I'm just going to sit here, right? That somebody in a care home, I'm saying all the time, they're not prisoners, right? If they want to go out and have Sunday lunch with their family, right? They should go. And then if somebody in a care home or a nurse says, no, you don't have freedom of travel, we are confining you to a small room for the rest of your life. You go, no, I want to go out for Sunday lunch. I want to get a taxi. I want to go to the beach. I want to go to a movie. They are not prisoners. And if they don't have the wherewithal, it is the people listening to your program now have to go, no, we're not taking this anymore. We're not confined to our home. We have freedom of speech, freedom to... You know what I mean? Anyway, so I would be saying we all have these freedoms and rights. No one can take them away. We need to shift the paradigm, right? And I would be very happy to help or encourage or inspire or, associate in any kind of conference with, if somebody is listening to this, to say, 10 teachers, you know, retired, or people who've been to university. They want to set up a course to qualify people into English constitutional law. And what we need to do is educate to the police now, because the police are our brothers and sisters, but to tell them this is unlawful, and then to have a mechanism to educate the general public, because it so resonates and makes such common sense, right from wrong, that actually we could educate the whole population. So in a way, let's use the lockdown to inspire, you know, people to say, no, you can't go around punching children. You can't go around taking people from their home and locking them up in a hospital without their consent, right? That is wrong, and anyone who does it has to be held to account. And you have the best system in the world under English constitutional law to do that.
Well, I like to walk in the woods near to my home, and they've now put posters up on the trees on the way up to the woods. There's a little village at the bottom of the woods where people park their cars on the lane. So they've put posters, COVID-19 posters up, saying that you shouldn't be out of area and all that. When I came back around from down to the lane, there was a police car sitting on the lane. There was loads of cars parked there, and there was a police car sitting there, and the guy was sat in the car. And you know, I'm thinking, should I go up and ask him, you know, have you nothing better to do than to sit there monitoring who's coming for a Sunday walk?
So you see that this is tyranny, right? So you know what is kind of, there is a philosophy behind natural law as well, right? You know, you might, which might sound very esoteric, we'll say that it's kind of like if people do wrong, you know, that in the natural law, you know, because, you know, if you see something that's done wrong, like for me, I was shocked today when I saw that teacher or that teenager, right, been beaten up. He was rightly, you know, saying, you know, I'm only standing here, I'm walking on the sidewalk, right? But the thing is, we kind of in our core, you know when something is wrong, right? So when you see those signs, right? And when you see really it's intimidation and coercion, because you see, now I won't go into it, but I have spent 20 years, you know, I was reading about how the various agents of society were saying 20 years ago there would be a huge death between 2020 and 2025, right? They were predicting, and therefore the government was not going to be funding the welfare system, and the pensions, you know, had to be funded. And I was thinking to myself, okay, that's very interesting. They're predicting or planning for a huge reduction in life expectancy from, you know, 2015, 2020 onwards, right? And a huge sharp drop. I was thinking, okay, that means, you know, what is going to happen in the next, and of course I was looking into it because I was aware that the combined vaccine schedules were actually causing huge amounts of adverse event death, you know, in babies, and you know, huge illness and chronic fatigue and reduction in life expectancy, right? But of course I really looked into it. But of course there are agents of the state, right? So what they're people who are undermining our life expectancy, right? And not giving people life-saving treatments, causing death and earlier death, right? They are undermining the bond between us and the healthcare system, okay? Which is going on every day. You can see it. That's why doctors are fired and censored, and scientists. They're not allowing them tell people you can look after your health. But what is unfortunately insidious now with what's going on with the police, the judiciary, and the politicians, right? And it's a win-win for people who are trying to destruct the fabric of society. And the police, unfortunately, are going along with it, is that we have to trust the police, you know, in a society to keep us safe, so that if someone is actually, you know, doing harm to us, that we can report it to the police. But what's going on now is that the police, instead of saying, no, we know the law, they are colluding by intimidating people, right, from going for a walk, or punching people, assaulting people, unlawfully arresting or kidnapping people, right? And what that does, there's a triple-edged sword, really, right, is that it means that people then no longer trust the police. And if you don't trust the police and you're afraid the police are actually acting worse than criminals, because other people, ordinary people, are not going around punching teenagers, right?
Yeah.
And then, as we know in Ireland, that if you try and seek justice, the courts are not open to the public, and they are, pushing back claims for months. So under English law, natural law, rule of law, you have to have immediate access to justice, which if you had a jury of 12, you could have it within a month. It wouldn't cost anything. Everyone has the right to be in a jury, right? So what it's doing is undermining the fabric of society, because not only are the police involved in unlawful behavior, potentially criminality, assaulting people, kidnapping people unlawfully, but actually when you see a policeman, you won't then trust them. But that means that then if a crime is actually committed to you, you have nowhere to go. And so why, when you see that there's like this plan that undermines people's health, right? That also now, that's where chaos and real tyranny happens. That the average law-abiding person who has worked well all their lives, they might be burgled or something might happen to them. And now they actually even don't have a police force to go to. And they are not confident that they will have access to the law, and that the ministers and prime ministers are bringing in statutes and acts of parliament that are actually undermining their ability to engage and walk in the streets and engage. So unfortunately, what's going on now is a kind of an attempt to destroy society. But once we explain it to people, you don't kind of give them authority and go, they are taking away our rights, right? What you say is, there are a group of criminals, right, acting unlawfully, who we as a society are working every day, as well as paying our bills and paying for our houses and our food. We are paying for their salary for them to engage in criminal behavior, which is unlawful, and they know it. And they have set up a system where they are not accountable for criminal behavior. And therefore, as a society, they almost, in their contracts, as civil servants and people who swear an oath, that if you are actually engaged in criminality, you actually no longer, you renege your right to a pension and to future salary. You're actually making yourself no longer entitled to your salary, right? You basically have done whatever it is it's called. It's made yourself unemployable. Then the phrase has, it's gross misconduct, right? Gross misconduct. But also it means that as of the date, if somebody, has a police officer, right? Gross misconduct means they're no longer entitled to their pension or their salary. And essentially what's going on, what people need to be aware of, is what's going on in the UK Parliament, the minister, the prime minister, the civil service, the health, the police, the officials on top of the police are committing gross misconduct against the ordinary. When I mean ordinary, I mean the common people in a good way that are paying their salaries. And therefore, really, the ordinary people have to say this is tyranny. And it's now not left or right or liberal or conservative. It's tyranny versus freedom. And the English people have to use the time now that they're locked in their homes to actually go back to the rule of law, English constitutional law, and say, we have to actually constitute a mechanism under English constitutional law to hold people to account. And I would start with Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Minister Hancock, right? And if they are held to account.
The nanny state that they created was to effectively treat everybody like children in the end, wasn't it? I mean, they call it the nanny state for a reason. And now with universal credits, I mean, they brought the food banks in because they knew that people would suffer on universal credits and they would be able to feed their families. So wherever there was universal credits rolled out, there was a food bank rolled out with it. But now with crippling everybody's businesses, so many people now are having to rely on the nanny state to get through. And that effect, like you were saying about when you work and you pay your taxes, you pay their wages, they work for you. But when you're on the nanny state, you're effectively a slave to the system that they've created, where you feel you have no power because you're on the breadline and you're barely feeding your family and you're worrying about losing the roof over your head. And there must be so many. I mean, I lost my job a few years ago, so I'm quite used to being in this situation. But for a lot of people, this last year has put them in that position that they never thought they would ever be in. so I think that, you know, that nanny state is
she's just dropped out. I don't know if she's going to jump back in or not.
Yeah, we've lost her, haven't we?
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, yeah, mine keeps going on and off as well a little bit, but yeah, well, hopefully she comes back on. But I was just saying about from what Dolores was saying about you know, when we pay their wages and things, but if you're accessing benefits, you're a slave to the system. So I do hope that a lot of people do educate themselves and you know, find the rule of law. And I'm just saying to Dolores, thank you, welcome back. I was just saying, I hope people do use this time where they're unemployed or you know, have to close their businesses, and they get angry enough to educate themselves on the law. And you know, all these bar owners and restaurant owners and gym owners can all, you know.
And maybe I should say that, you know, part of the rationale of the World Freedom Alliance, right? So all we're doing is really common sense, right? That people have freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, bodily integrity, right? People can't coerce you. You have freedom to speech, and you have freedom to go and walk to your town square, right? Just simply walk, not to get punched in the face by 3 policemen, right? Okay? That is very fundamental. So I think what we're saying in the World Freedom Alliance is our charter is very simple, right? Freedom of speech, bodily integrity, you know, just very simple. Freedom of thought, freedom of association, freedom, right? But I think what people need to do is that this, in a way, COVID-19 is a termination of 30 years of authority figures that people paid through their taxes in a bond of trust to presume that we're all working together in society. But what we actually have is probably 1 in 5 people feigning that they are actually working as teachers or civil service or advisors to the government or politicians or police, but actually given the opportunity to actually be cruel in a way, right? And do things that are wrong. They are doing them. And it's kind of shocking for us to see, right? But it's happening now. And if we don't stop it now, every decade, we'll say, it'll get harder to stop. So, you know, we've seen that every 100 years or in every generation, people have to actually defend these rights. And now the time has come for the people alive now to actually defend our rights. But in the World Freedom Alliance, we have focus groups or pillars, including law, right? We extended it from the World Doctors Alliance, which is health and science, right? To areas of law, but also innovation, because to build a new model, we have to actually, you know, learn lessons from what's gone wrong in the past and hold people to account. But also fundamentally, we also have a pillar of banking and economics, right? So banking, economics, innovation, law, and science and medicine, so that there is an infrastructure there. We're around 50 countries in the world. We want to bring it to 200 countries to help people listening to this across the British Isles to actually bring in this mechanism, because it is about time, I have to say, that Minister Hancock has to be held to account for what he's been doing for a year. And we can go into the adverse events of the vaccine, but it is shocking, you know, it's absolutely shocking that he is pushing this.
Sweden have put a hold on the Pfizer vaccine because of the deaths, and I think
no, Norway has as well. Russia, China,
yeah,
and Norway, right? Norway had 23 deaths,
yeah,
right? And China.
I think Sweden had 30.
Okay, yeah. And the thing is, you know, in May 2020, why I came out so strongly in my interviews was that, and it is incumbent on, there's not that many immunologists in the world that would have studied this, right? Is that this was all foreseeable. And why I came out so strongly calling it crimes against humanity and saying anyone recommending an mRNA vaccine as a solution to COVID-19, I already said then it would be a crime of malfeasance and a crime against humanity and attempted murder, right? Which it is, because this was all foreseen. And why it was important for someone like me, because to come out then, because in a court of law, right? And the crime of malfeasance is that if you didn't know, you should have known, right? And my videos then got at least, I think, 20 million in May and June, right? You know, which means that anyone who was going to recommend this a year later, they and their civil servants and the scientific community, and of course it wasn't just me, you know, Dr. Adil lost his job, Dr. Simon Gold, you know, lots of people came out. But why it was important for us to come out a year before or 9 months before is that if Minister Hancock and Minister Boris Johnson and Dr. Leo Varadkar in Ireland and Micheál Martin in Ireland as prime ministers, and you know the president of Ireland and whatever your queen, right, is that it is incumbent on all of them to not engage in something that's going to harm people. And malfeasance is, you can't say you didn't know, because you should have known, and you have all the civil service, you have doctors, you have committees, and you yourself should know. And it was foreseen that people would die. But what is shocking for me, just for people to know, I think in these mRNA, they're not vaccines because they don't really elicit a protective immune response. They're gene therapy, or they're treatments, so-called treatments that should be compared to hydroxychloroquine and zinc or ivermectin, is that they will cause much more harm than good, right? And therefore, the minister who approves them, you know, and the government can be held personally accountable. But there should not be a second vaccine for mRNA, right? It primes the thing. It's like getting someone allergic to peanuts or something, you know, through anaphylaxis. The first one is worse. But can you imagine if you injected someone with peanuts and then you said in 3 weeks' time, so they have some kind of anaphylaxis, they don't die, but they're made, you know, very sensitive, their immune system is primed. And then a month later, you come along and you inject them again with something that they shouldn't have been injected with in the first place, then it could be 1 in 10 people will have an adverse reaction within. So 1 in 40 people have an adverse event reaction, the CDC reported, within 5 days of the first vaccine, mRNA, between December 14th and 20th.
My daughter used to work at a care home, and the 2 young girls that work there, they're only in their early 20s. They both had the vaccine because they work in the care home, and they've both been ill. I think one of them's ear swelled up and everything. You know, they've not.
Yeah,
they've
but
had
I think what's
headaches
shocking is, so it's kind of 1 in 40 with severe adverse reactions just immediately within 5.
Yeah.
But okay, well, within 5 days, and this is one where you can't engage in work.
Yeah.
That you should not be getting this vaccine. It's not a vaccine, gene therapy or whatever, in a double dose, right? So say if you do get it, I would expect that maybe 1 in 10 people will have severe adverse reactions, right? But the major priming that I was talking about viral interference, super priming, cytokine storm, will happen when whatever is in the RNA is going to come, maybe February, March, April 2021 or next year. And I am predicting that 80% of the elderly with comorbidities that get the double dose of the vaccine and potentially influenza will die, right? 80% of people over 80 potentially, right? So this is, you know, something. And as well, those people could be protected by vitamins D, C, and zinc, and by hydroxychloroquine, zinc, ivermectin, right? So there is no need for the vaccine. And so why I'm saying it's important we have an autopsy service is that those people will die from organ failure and sepsis. And that in the, you know, across the world, they are trying to prevent autopsies because someone who dies from organ failure will look very different from someone who dies because of a viral infection, and someone who will be very different from SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, and an adverse event to the influenza vaccine will be very different from the adverse events from the coronavirus, which is different from the anaphylaxis. And it should not happen that everyone should get an autopsy. And that's why some of the solutions are to actually, you know, submit or pay a small amount of money to get an autopsy so that you can then, and I'm considering setting up one, the way I've been setting up an airline or the World Freedom Alliance.
Yeah, I heard you speaking about the airline for passengers that don't want the vaccine and still want to travel, because some of the airlines are saying if you don't, you know, was it Ryanair or something, they had an ad out for it, didn't they? You could,
yeah, they did. Yeah. So if anybody just wants to help us, they will help us because we're looking for funding. So it's called freedomairway.com. So on a lot of the globalist search engines, you can't find it. But if you type in www.freedomairway.com, you'll get it. And if we get around 2,000 people that can join as members with £100 each or €100, we'll have enough to pay for the first flight, which we will hopefully make a profit on. And then we will guarantee that people can fly without track and tracing, without passenger locator, without vaccines. But also we are trying to also take legal cases to push back, because if it is unlawful to inhibit people to travel in Ireland and England, right? If you have a flight between England and Ireland and the both governments try and do something that's unlawful, I would personally be happy to take a legal case, you know, High Court, Supreme Court case here to say, no, this is unlawful, and we will win. So part of what Freedom Airway wants to do is to engage with policy and legal cases as well, to give precedence cases to push back so that people can travel. Because under your beautiful law, no king or anyone can actually prevent anyone traveling. If you are traveling, you are a traveler in England, and the king himself, and no one can prevent you from traveling, and no one can take away your right of freedom to travel, which includes walking on your street, walking on your village, and it also includes meeting to assemble and associate, including in Trafalgar Square, to hear doctors and scientists speak. It's all very simple, very common sense.
Yeah. What do you think of the, because my daughter works in a school and she was asked to sign a consent form for the PCR testing, but she didn't sign it. Her and her friend didn't sign it. And so now they're putting pressure on her about not signing the consent form. And did she want to talk to somebody about it? Well, so I've also got to have it.
Yeah, don't sign it, right? But anyone who coerces you, the PCR test is a medical procedure. It is unlawful. Anyone who coerces you into a medical procedure that you do not want, it is a crime, right? And those people can be held to account. So what I've been saying across, you know, the whole world is people need to actually say, no, like under, you know, bodily integrity, you cannot be coerced. You do not consent, right? You just keep saying you do not consent. But if your employer forces you, that's a crime. And so what I've been saying is students or teachers should be taking the principal or the board of management to court for forcing you, right? So, you know, can you imagine there's a whole area of law if someone forces some to touch your body, right? We know in legal cases, right? So someone forcing you, like to do a PCR test, it's on the same spectrum of battery or invasion of your privacy, right?
Right.
So
okay.
No.
Let me ask you then, Dolores, because on a personal level, as you know, I've got to have an operation next month.
Don't book me too much. Yeah, you know, yeah.
They've booked me in for a PCR test 3 days before, and they've turned people down from having operations for not having a PCR test, because you've got to have
no, you don't have to have anything. No, you see, you know the way you have, right? So what I'm telling you, Sharon, is you ring and you say to them, I have inalienable rights of bodily integrity, right? And that if you were to coerce me into doing something, that is a crime against my inalienable rights of bodily integrity and under the Nuremberg Code, right? So if it's a nurse or anybody, they can be struck off, because medical professionals cannot coerce patients engaging in the health system to do stuff, right? Because we've seen how that works, right? Where you have doctors, you know, we've had coercing people to do something. So that is, unlike 3 or 4 levels, it's unlawful. So what you say to them is, what you are doing, I do not consent. Everyone is entitled to a medical procedure, right? Not entitled, but if they are required for one, and either the state will pay or you're going to pay, right? So it's actually unlawful. And any doctor engaging in coercion for a medical procedure to get access to another medical procedure, the doctor can be struck off, but you can sue their indemnity insurance, right? So I have been on phone calls with people in the UK and Ireland saying, can you give me to the consultant or the administrator? And I tell them, you know, the Nuremberg Code, where doctors could not coerce people, could not do medical experiments on people, could not force them, you know, withdraw a medical procedure because they were in pain or life-saving if they were engaged in another medical procedure, like an experiment, you know, or a coercive procedure that was unnecessary. So all of that is medical negligence, and it is a crime against their bodily integrity. But the doctor can be struck off, right? And the person can sue them for medical negligence for not giving them timely access to a life-saving or pain-relieving medical procedure. So under 4 levels. So, you know, when people say to them, we have to use a different language, what people have to say, like the tests in the school or in the hospital, you say, people are trying to coerce me to do something with my body that I do not consent. This is unlawful behavior, and I am figuring out a process to ensure that they are struck off as medical professionals, including as doctors, and to claim against their indemnity insurance or their medical insurance or against the teachers in the school for engaging in coercive behavior. Because it's almost like, you know, in child abuse, if some group of people wanted to, you know, coerce people into raping them, right? That is a procedure with your body you do not consent to. And now you have a group of people trying to say, well, you know, which they do, unfortunately, to people all the time. If you want to do something, I am forcing you to do something. You just say no, right? So it is coercive behavior, and people, you know, should not engage with it, right? You just say no.
There's just a comment there saying, ask Dolores to write all that down for me so that when I go to the hospital, I can just hand it in.
No, I'm telling you that the thing is, what people have to do, and please do a favor for me, is that we're doing the World Freedom Alliance. So please maybe join up to the World Freedom Alliance. It's free. Just, you know, click on the webpage or whatever.
Yeah.
And
I think I'm already on it.
Yeah. But also, like, there are people like the UK freedomalliance.org or whatever, or .co.uk, right? Is that rather than me having to do it, right? What we're saying is, if you have a little bit of time and you're at home, you can just you can go to the meetings of the World Freedom Alliance. We give all the guidance there, or we're developing with people from other countries. And that what we need to do is everybody to write to the principals in the school. You know, there's probably a few hundred that you just write to the principal and say, you should not be forcing teachers. And what is I think the most, there are a number of shocking things. The people in care homes are not prisoners. They should be allowed to see their family and make a choice. The doctors should be giving life-saving treatments for people who have influenza-like symptoms, prevention vitamins D, C, and zinc, hydroxychloroquine and zinc, ivermectin, right? Why are the doctors not making them available? And masks are entirely not necessary, cause huge amounts of harm for everybody, but especially for children and teenagers. They are detrimental. They are not helping. They are reducing your oxygen, increasing carbon dioxide. They should be taken off. So if anybody is listening to this, form communities and just write to the principal, get the teenagers to just take the mask off. And I think as well, the masks are being used insidiously so that police, you know, and people cannot have their identity revealed, and that they feel that they can engage more in, you know, coercive behavior or in abusive language, as I've experienced them doing, or unlawful behavior, you know. So the mask should be gone.
The main supermarket chains have now apparently making it compulsory to wear a mask in their stores as well. I've never worn one, and I can't do it. Even at the hospital, they give me one of those screens to put around my head.
I know, but Sharon, what you say is the supermarkets are unlawfully infringing on our freedom and rights of bodily integrity, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I know I'm harping on about it, but
no, it's right though. You need to get that across. You know, it's right.
And you know the way, so what you can reframe it, like your operation or whatever, you can say, you know what, the administrator in the hospital is committing a crime against my bodily integrity, right? Against the law, against the Nuremberg Code, by coercing me against my consent to say, I can only get a life-saving operation, which I am entitled to, as an English person, right? They are coercing me unlawfully against the Nuremberg Code, where, doctors and all kinds of, police were rightly put in prison for this kind of coercive, unlawful criminal behavior. And you know what? This administrator can actually be struck off, and I can sue them under their indemnity insurance or personally for denying me a life-saving operation, right? And the same with the principal. They are actually coercing someone into a bodily, procedure against their consent, and that your daughter or whatever should sue the principal for actually coercing an unlawful and criminal behavior, right? And the supermarket that is criminally not respecting your rights of bodily autonomy and bodily integrity, that you can sue the manager and the chain for actually discriminating against people who, for whatever their own private reasons and for their inalienable rights, right? And that in the UK, I've been saying to everyone that when a supermarket does that once, it's discrimination, right? You don't have to produce any evidence, but without any cost, you can get 9,000 euros in compensation. And if they do it twice, right, it's actually criminal behavior, okay? And you can get more. So I'm saying everyone who's stuck at home that has to deal with abusive behavior in supermarkets, learn about the discrimination law in the UK and sue them. You don't need a solicitor, and you will get 9,000. And maybe you use that 9,000 for some good in the world to push back, but also maybe the managers won't be so bullying and engaging in unlawful behavior if somebody even starts saying, I am taking a case. You know what I mean? I know I'm harping on about reframing it, but once you reframe it and go, wait a minute, that manager is actually discriminating against me, because I say when I'm on the airlines and they don't respect my rights, right? And then they end up saying a pilot has to come down. And I say to them, I have an inalienable right of bodily integrity, right? I don't need to wear a mask. I have a right of privacy. Under EU GDPR data protection regulation, you cannot see my health information. And I have an inalienable right to privacy. So you're actually committing 4 crimes here, asking me to show you whatever letter. But also you're not respecting my rights, right? To, if I say I have an issue. And I say to them, it would be like asking someone in a wheelchair on the plane, why are you in a wheelchair, right? For them to give you the history of why they may have had an accident and broke their back, right? Of course, or someone who's blind, that you would challenge them and say, are you really blind? How were you made blind? Was it in an accident, right? Of course, people would go, we have fought for decades so that people who have disabilities are not discriminated against in that way. And now suddenly here you have professionals engaging in like 5 breaches of, discrimination and privacy. So that's why I reframe it all the time. I say to people, no, right? And then you have to say, on what lawful basis are you engaging in breaching my privacy, breaching my medical privacy, my bodily integrity? Are you discriminating against me? Are you going to take my medical data and breach GDPR, which applies even to the UK and all countries allegedly outside of the EU, which I don't agree with? But for people, they may not be aware, but a company engaging in that is 20 million for the first offence. And the individual doing that can be charged, at least in Ireland, 50,000. So each pilot, 50,000, each air hostess, right? So what's really going on is criminal and unlawful behavior at different levels. And just because in 2020, no one is held to account under malfeasance and crimes against humanity, there is no time limit, right? So people can actually, and I think that if people, lose their businesses, they can all kind of dedicate some time, maybe 5 hours a week in their lives to actually seek justice. Maybe not for people our age, but for like the teenager that was punched in the face by an on-duty policeman when he was just walking, engaging in his right to travel.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, I hope everyone's taking that in and taking it on board, because we really need to get moving this year in fighting back like you say, it's now or never, isn't it, really?
Well, I think if we don't do it, you know what I say? People have all these things like, oh my God, right? Things are getting worse. But what I say is I'm a total optimist, right? No matter how bad it gets, the sun will come up the next day and they can't kill us all, right? So I think this whole con only works with fear, right? And if you don't, if you're not afraid, and we are not fighting just for us, we're fighting for the 2 generations behind us, we'll say in my case, but also for the children as yet unborn and the generations to come. And as we know, across all of our countries, people dedicated their lives for freedom, right? Throughout history, at their own personal cost. But for us, you know, for us that would be born in later generations. And, you know, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, right? And I really appreciated the joy in society. You know, it was a wonderful time to live in the 70s. And people were really friendly. And you would go, when I would travel, I went to school as a child, actually, you know, in the UK, and people were really friendly. And like you'd have a rapporteur with the bus driver or people. It was a great time. And so I actually appreciated then that all of the freedoms and rights were won for me by the, you know, the generations before us. And unfortunately, through an insidious structure over maybe, you know, probably 300 or 400 years, but really insidiously in the last 110 years, and more so in the last 40 years, especially since we went into the EU and the UN, WHO, that unfortunately it is our turn to do it again. And we have to do it now, because if we don't, when you see their projections with the way the system they want around banking, food, making people unhealthy, and AI, and pretending there are no jobs in the future, which is all entirely wrong. If we are healthier than the generations to come, if we don't stop the vaccines and the adverse events and medical error. So it was really incumbent on anyone who is healthy now and has a bit of time to rock up and maybe look at the World Freedom Alliance or visit the.
I don't know if Katie can put the link up on the screen. I don't know if she can do that, but yeah, I mean, Bill Gates has bought all that farmland and stockpiled all those seeds for a reason, hasn't he?
Yeah, but the thing is, the beauty is that we can, you know, we are the 99% or almost 99.9%. So their whole scam really, or whatever you want to call it, only works if we're afraid. But actually what I'm saying is people like us have skills and have time, and we are going to dedicate our lives to this. And, you know, these guys are literally probably, I would say, about 600 to 1,000 people. And, you know, with malfeasance, anyone can be held to account. And we are not going away. We are 7,000 million people. And, you know, I'm in touch with people in Africa, South America, all over the world. And even if you haven't met someone before, within 1 or 2 minutes, everyone knows. And that's where you come back to natural law and rule of law and the kind of inalienable right and wrong and consciousness, you know, and the whole idea that if you do wrong in the world, that actually that ripples out the way good does. And these people have done wrong, and they are in a privileged position, you know, that they didn't do it because they were desperate and they needed money. You know, multi-generationally, they have been involved in huge wrong. And it is up to the majority of people in the world now who are waking up to address that wrong, and they will be held to account. And on a positive note, even though it's tragic now for the teenagers with masks and the elderly locked into the care homes, it probably had to get this bad for maybe the middle 60, 70% of the population to fully understand what's going on. And maybe they have to see the police punching, you know, teenagers in the face for walking on the street, for them to go, okay, you know, that is not right. And they need to also now go on a journey like us, you know.
I must say though, whenever I do go into a supermarket, the staff never bother me, but the customers, it's the other customers that I'll comment, or they'll walk around me as if I'm contaminated with something, you know. But my daughter and I had a conversation earlier about how they treated the Jews in Nazi Germany, and they could only get away with that because of the compliance of the citizens of Germany, and you know, them putting their Star of David round their arm just so they could go get their shopping. Or, you know, if I have to do that to get my shopping, I'll wear it. You know, and we know how that progressed, and it didn't work out well for them, did it? So this is, people should learn the lesson from that as well. They need to learn the history and see how they use the medical services in that time as well.
Yeah, and I suppose the thing is that what's going on now, the propaganda was really developed over 100 years, right? And what the people who wanted to manipulate ordinary, normal people, good people, was that humans have two kind of instinctive things. One is they want to be part of a group. They don't want to be the only one. So they're part of the majority. So that if you want to manipulate society, you just have to engineer a coercive situation that the majority will, in a way, do anything. And then the second thing from a psychological point of view is that if you can make people afraid of a nuclear bomb or a virus or whatever, that it's much easier to manipulate them. So what you're experiencing, and that's called, you know, there's propaganda, there's media influence, coercion, fear, mongering, and neuro-linguistic programming, where they actually, you know, put in these words to say, you know, stay safe, stay at home, wash your hands, whatever it is. So when you are experiencing what you're happening in a supermarket, that is actually the culmination of maybe 70 years of propaganda and manipulation, and the last like coercive 1 or 2 years of, it's a combination of the trusted people, politicians, the medical profession, the media, and all of these as manipulators, propagandists, psychological, neuro-linguistic programming, you know, making the vast majority of people, and then having things where they don't know whether it's tier 2 or 5 or 2 kilometers or whatever. So what you're experiencing in the supermarket, a lot of thought and, you know, funding of society has to go in to engineer a situation where people are fear-mongered and manipulated and deciding they don't want to be the 1 or 2 people that stand up against it, to be the sheep. And that is why, because the Germans were the most educated people, you know, and they were manipulated in the 30s to actually do all of the horrible things that happened as one of the most cultured, educated, you know, sophisticated, music-loving thinkers, philosophers, you know, 10 or 20 years before. And that's why, you know, a lot of the propaganda techniques were tried out, unfortunately, on them, and they, in a way, you know, it worked horribly, right? And so that's what's going on now. It's really manipulation. And what's very interesting, if you look at UK Column and the, you know, which I admire the people in that very much, is that they actually pick apart better than I do the psychological underpinning of manipulation and coercion and government. And so that's why it makes it towards a crime against humanity, right? Because engineering fear and manipulation and using these. And so the thing is, a lot of people are studying now, comparing what the BBC News is doing and the language used by Hancock and Boris Johnson, and how you actually engineer fear, and people die from fear and loneliness, right? And manipulation. So these guys, in a way, and the people on the committees are generally involved in manipulation, marketing, psychological, neuro-linguistic programming. They're actually setting up a situation that they can be held accountable, because the techniques that they're using are well researched. So when you come to the supermarket, you're not really meeting the people you thought you were. They've actually been manipulated by multiple things from the media, politicians, to have those behaviors. So it's almost like I'm saying those people are numb, you know? They've been
That's
put
why
into
I've not watched TV for years.
Yeah, that's probably why we're having the conversation. But I think we need to have empathy for those people in the supermarket, because they are watching TV. And I think sometimes they might be kinder people. They trust the politicians and the doctors, right? They're thinking, why would a doctor tell me something that wasn't true? Why would a professional not do that? But unfortunately, there's a whole lot of propaganda and manipulation going on. And that's why they can and will be held to account. It might take 10 or 20 years, but or it might take 2 or 3 years. But because a lot of people now know how you manipulate, how you fearmonger, which are all crimes and crimes against humanity, you can look at the BBC every day. It's textbook. They will be held to account eventually, or else we would be encouraging them to stop it. If anyone in the members of parliament are listening to this, I would personally very gladly help to row it back and say, biggest mistake was made. It is ruining every generation. Every single person in Ireland, all across the British Isles, have been impacted by it. Just come out and say it's wrong. Either resign or engage with people that will row it back so that people can just engage in normal lives again.
Yeah. Yes, it's going to be an interesting year. Oh, thanks so much for coming on, Dolores. I know how busy you are, and it's been great talking to you. And
thank you.
I'm sure you've educated a lot of people as well.
It's just common sense, really, Sharon. But also, we have the 18th of January, right? It's going to be an interesting week as well, in the next few days, whatever is going to happen. So I think a Chinese curse was, may you live in interesting times, right? That was like a curse. I think we are kind of
certainly that.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? All right. Thank you very much, Sharon.
Oh, thank you so much. And we'll speak soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, lovely. All right, Sharon, and very good with everything. It's lovely to talk to you.
Yeah,
all
you
right?
too. You take care now. Stay out of trouble. Oh. It's all right, Katie. You can finish.
Got trigger finger, sorry.
I just want to thank everybody for watching, whoever's watching and listening. And if you're catching this at a later time, a lot of good advice there. I know it's gone on a long time, and some people look at the video and think, oh, it's nearly 2 hours long, that I'll have to watch it later, but it is worth a watch. So yeah, hope you do watch. Thanks, everybody.